Charities get tens of billions of dollars in donations and get billions of dollars when it comes to tax breaks. But critics say that there is a lack of government oversight. And it also shows that right now 4 cancer charities stand accused of multi-million-dollar frauds. And I don't have to even remind you about the problems with the Clinton Foundation. Now, a short time ago, I spoke about all of this with David Callahan. He's the founder and editor of Inside Philanthropy. And as you indicated, and obviously been in the headlines lately, both with the Clinton Foundation and also those 4 cancer charities, the 2 biggest problems that you'd say a lot of us have is we don't know who the donors are that are giving the money, and probably of even greater importance, we don't know where the money's going, right?
There's not a lot of transparency in this sector. Nonprofits do not have to reveal their donors, so you could have people giving money, big checks to nonprofits that have a political agenda, an ideological agenda, and you don't know where that money is coming from, which I think raises some troubling questions about how the nonprofit sector could be used in ways that advance people's self-interest or their ideological agenda.
Are we talking about, from your vantage point, a fraud on the margin, that maybe money could be better spent, but largely it's been done? Are we talking about massive fraud? How big of a problem is this largely unregulated world?
I don't think that the biggest problem is fraud. You know, we did see those 4 cancer charities that turned out to have built tens of millions of dollars out of donors. But those are outlier cases. Yes, there's some fraud here and there in the charitable sector. I think the biggest problem is the overall lack of transparency and accountability in this nonprofit sector, which has grown in size in recent years. There's more billionaire donors who are coming into this sector, and it shapes a lot of our society. You know, you have foundations and nonprofits that are trying to shape just about every policy dimension you can think of. Education, they're involved in charter schools, they're involved in environmental policy, civil rights, you know, pushing for changes in tax policy, regulatory policy. You know, these are often political actors, much as political parties have an agenda or candidates. And we do want transparency around those electoral donations. We should also see some transparency in the nonprofit sector as well, more transparency than we've seen so far.
And you know, David, I'll show my ignorance, but I think a lot of the audience feels the same way. Let's say I write a $1,000 check to the David Callahan Foundation and you're set up for good works. I know what I can put down as a tax deduction, but I always assumed you as a foundation would have to identify the total dollars you received. Wrongly, it turns out, who gave you the money, but where the money went, identify how much was for administrative costs, where those dollars went so they were directed to at least, you know, what at least the donor thought the monies were going to. Where was my assumption wrong in that hypothetical?
Well, there's 2 different issues here. One is about transparency, and the second is about accountability for how money is used. On the transparency front, you're totally right. If you write a check to the David Callahan Fund, I don't have to reveal that you are the donor. So that can be a secret donation in effect. In terms of how I spend that money as a nonprofit, there are some really good watchdogs out there like Charity Navigator, GuideStar, these other new watchdogs that have emerged that do judge the effectiveness of nonprofit organizations, how much money they spend on administrative expenses, how efficient they are in terms of those dollars reaching the truly needy.
I want to get a couple things where you say some of the consequences of this relatively unregulated landscape are. Talk about, and use Philadelphia like you do in there, about a donation to the public schools with a condition about some of the political consequences and also the partisan really tools that they're using, foundations and obviously philanthropic gifts, how they come with maybe some unintended or unknown at least agendas.
Yeah, well, here's the thing, you know, the charitable tax deduction was created almost 100 years ago, and you know, you give money to charity, you get a tax deduction. And back when that deduction was created, you know, we didn't have this big infrastructure of public policy groups that were trying to influence what the government does. We didn't have this ideological arms race between think tanks and advocacy shops that basically serve as the kind of de facto brains of political movements and political parties. The Heritage Foundation, for example, is closely allied with the Republican Party. The Center for American Progress, closely allied with the Democratic Party. And, the idea that those organizations are being subsidized by taxpayers to advance their ideological agenda through this tax exemption that was created almost 100 years ago strikes me as problematic. And you can get the same tax deduction for giving money to abolish the food stamps program, to the Cato Institute or a libertarian group that wants to do that, as you can get for giving money to a food pantry. And that just seems crazy to me.
Do donors, and you're talking to a lot of them in the audience right now, do we get our money's worth at the end of the day when we give money to charity?
I absolutely think so. I think charitable dollars do go a long way. Warren Buffett has famously called philanthropy the risk capital in society. These are dollars to try to do interesting things that maybe government can't do, that business doesn't have an interest in doing. So I think that charitable monies are well spent, that we should all give, we should, give more, and that, great things are happening in terms of solving some of society's biggest problems.
David Callahan, I appreciate a few minutes. Thank you so much.
Great to be here.
And coming up next, everyone, our Hudson Valley headlines.